Poinsettia, Chapter 20. Even after a few hours had passed, the members of the board remained in the boardroom, muttering about Gavin's audacity. "Lord McCairn, you fixed it, right?" Mr. O'Brien asked. "You did forge the receipts and paperwork, right?" "Not all of them. I only did the paperwork for this year, and the other two I didn't get to tamper with." "He'll find missing numbers, Lord McCairn," Mr. O'Brien whined. "He'll find out that the money wasn't used for the hospital." "Keep your mouth shut," Lord McCairn ordered. "I hadn't expected him to take the entire 3 years' worth of files. Perhaps he's bluffing, though. He's intent on getting reactions out of me. But letting him have his bluff called, perhaps he won't bother. Nobody could get through all those files in a short manner of time." "What about the minutes?" "What about them? Mr. Borders is dead. It's not like he can snitch on us." "But the minutes are in his home. He's quick-handed. He can write down whole conversations in the speed it takes to verbalize them," Mr. O'Brien frowned. "What if he gets access to them? He'll know about the trips to England. He'll know about the luxuries. He'll know about the withdrawing of petty cash. He'll know about the harlots." "Would he really be so spiteful as to record a bunch of sexually frustrated old men searching for exotic pleasures?" Lord McCairn asked. "He's the most thorough there was." Lord McCairn sat back. "We should consider this matter, then." "What should we do?" "We'll just have to retrieve those files before he can lay his righteous hands on them. Is your son free, Mr. O'Brien?" Mr. O'Brien paled. "What are you suggesting?" "Your son has a rather poor reputation, Mr. O'Brien. His skills may prove useful to us. That is, if he wishes to remain in the law's favor." "So, you'll blackmail me and my son? You're such a monster!" "A monster who will be sure that you keep your job," Lord McCairn snapped. "When will your son be available?" "Not until tomorrow." "Good. Then tomorrow night, we'll just have your boy go on a little hunting trip and retrieve those minutes from the late Mr. Borders' home." "What about Mrs. Borders?" another board member asked. "What about her? For all I care, he can rape her or kill her or kidnap her, sell her to the East as a white slave. What do I care?" "Can you do it?" Mr. O'Brien sighed. "I'm sure he's capable, but it gives me the creeps." "It's settled then. Tomorrow night those minutes will be in our hands." Outside the door, Danny took a step back, bringing her hands to her mouth. She squeezed Bumblebee close to her with her elbows before finally turning and running back to her room. Her bare feet made her retreat very quiet, but now there was pressing business. No one would believe what she had heard. Any normal little girl would hide under her bed or her covers, but Danny never considered herself a normal little girl before. In fact, she threw Bumblebee on the bed, going through the small wardrobe and through the small drawers. She laid out some clothing on the bed and began to dress Bumblebee up in a turtleneck, a pair of trousers, and a scarf with a winter hat. She then undressed herself and began to dress in a short dress that she had almost outgrown, a stolen pair of trousers underneath, and a pair of boots. She wrapped the scarf about her face and put a hat on her head, tying it under her chin. She then threw on a tweed jacket and mittens. "Bumblebee, come on. We have to tell Mr. Gavin what those mean men are up to." She stared at the bear a moment. "I'm scared too, but we can't let those men hurt anyone. Mr. Gavin will know what to do. Don't worry, I'll protect you." She held him close and walked into the hall, gasping when she saw the sisters on one side and the men on the other. This was not good. She sank back into the room. "What are we going to do? If everybody is in the hall, how are we going to go tell Mr. Gavin about those bad men?" She looked at Bumblebee's chin on her shoulder and turned around, staring at the window. "That's it! Bumblebee, you're a genius!" Angus sat crouched atop the castle. It was cold and windy, but in his coat of fur, being in his werewolf form, it didn't bother him as much as it would if he were in his human form. He admired the bright full moon above him as the wind rustled and tussled his fur about him. The air was so bitter and crisp, it almost burned his nose. He could smell the faint scent of dinners being cooked in fireplaces by the lower classes, and some sense of the kitchens beneath the larger homes. Oh, so many delicious meals. His belly let out a small gurgle, pleading for a little something. He ignored it for now. He rested his furry arms on his knees, continuing to admire the moon. He couldn't believe how bright it was. It shone so bright that it was like a silver sun. He could see clear over the entire city and countryside, even far off in the distant hills. Yes, he could see a few persistent birds. He could see a few people in the town walking along the cobblestone roads. He could see a child climbing down the side of the building. Wait, what? Angus shook his head and peered down again. There was a child climbing down the castle wall. The stone gutter systems and fallen stones from the side of the building provided her with footing for the most part. But everything was cold, wet, icy and slippery. He erected his ears, desperate to try and pick up a scent from her. Danny? He gasped. Indeed, Danny had crawled out of her bedroom window and began to climb down with Bumblebee in hand. The bear slipped, falling past her face. She gasped, turning her head and grabbing onto the scarf just in time to catch him. Thankfully, she was very good at her knots. "Bumblebee!" she called with a muffled voice. "Don't panic! I got you! Just don't look down!" She began to carefully navigate the wall, testing every step. She had to swallow her gut. She wouldn't allow herself to become frightened now. She couldn't be caught out here. Taking a moment to get up her nerve once more, she reached for another stone, then stepped, only to slip on an icy patch and slip backwards. She let out a scream, falling backwards towards the ground below. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the end. Here it came! She landed with a hard thud into muscular arms. Angus cradled her in one arm and casually held out his hand, catching Bumblebee, who fit easily in his massive hand. He handed the teddy bear to Danny and glared at her. "Are you crazy, lass? You could have been killed!" "They'll see us, Angus!" she yelled. "Hide!" Without a second thought, he darted into a shadowed crevice. He saw heads peeking out of windows, trying to find where the sudden noises outside were coming from. But it quickly grew quiet. Perhaps they thought it was an owl. Angus set Denny down. "What do you have going through your head, lass?" "Angus, I'm so glad you're here. I have to see Mr. Gavin." "This is no time for games, Danny." "It's not a game. Those men want to do something bad. I have to tell Mr. Gavin." "Men? What men?" "The ones in the big room. The creepy guys." "Angus, I have to tell him. Can you help me find him? He said he was going to the cemetery." "Are you sure?" "I was there. Please." Angus was silent a moment before letting out a sigh. "You got guts, lass. I have to say, I admire that. You're either a very courageous and selfless lass, or a very foolish one." He got down on all fours. "Hop on, lass. I'll take you to him. But you have to hold on really tight, all right?" Danny nodded, climbing onto Angus's back and clutching tightly onto his fur, after tucking Bumblebee securely into her jacket. He wouldn't get away this time. "Okay, I'm ready." With the tension of his muscles, Angus sprang forward, the child's hand clutching his fur and her legs wrapped firmly about his belly. She had to squint her eyes in order to see without her eyes freezing. If the matter had not been so urgent, she would have considered this a great fun. Not everybody got to ride on a werewolf's back. At this rate, they'd be at the cemetery in no time. Gavin ran a hand along the stone tomb of his wife and child. The wind outside whistled. "I almost wish it could be like those winters we spent together. The wind whistling outside just like this. The hot drinks, the hired musicians playing music. Ah, how we danced." He reached over, winding up the gramophone he had brought with him. He activated the device, hearing the beautiful musical recordings escape from it. I can't even remember the last time I danced. I think Karasu was 6 years old. That was the last time I danced. He paused and peered over to the sarcophagus. Isn't this amazing? It's called a gramophone. Now, I don't have to hire musicians every time I want to hear music. They can make recordings now. And you can play them over and over again on these devices. Can you imagine, Clementine? What will they come up with next? What a marvelous way to welcome in the fast-approaching new century. In the long run, this is a much more inexpensive alternative. You only pay for the purchasing price and the price of the musical pieces. After that, you can play them to your heart's content without spending another penny. He suddenly lifted his head and listened carefully. That wasn't the sound of music. He heard a howl and rushed from the mausoleum to find Angus galloping between headstones up the hill and stopping to kneel before Gavin. "Danny!" he shouted as the child slid back. "What are you doing here?" "Mr. Gavin, it's really bad. I was walking through the halls, and me and Bumblebee stopped at the big room the men meet in. And they were saying really mean and scary things, Mr. Gavin. They really were." Gavin blinked, glancing at Angus, who was panting to catch his breath. The vampire frowned and knelt down. "What happened, Danny?" "They were saying lots of stuff about receipts. The really mean guy said that he was making up fake receipts so you wouldn't know they were doing bad stuff with the money. But he didn't get to fake the older receipts, so they still have bad stuff in them. Then the mean guy was asking another man about his son, and that they were going to steal some minutes, and that they were going to hurt Mrs. Borders." "What?" Gavin snarled, baring his fangs. Danny, however, did not flinch. "They said that they were going to go tomorrow night and get the minutes and hurt her. They said the minutes had all kinds of notes about all the bad talk they did. I don't want them to hurt anybody, Mr. Gavin. So me and Bumblebee tried to escape to tell you all the bad stuff. But we couldn't get out because we would be seen, and so we crawled out the window." "Are you crazy, child?" Gavin gasped. "Already had this conversation, master," Angus panted. "I caught her. She insisted I bring her here. I didn't see a reason for her to lie." "Nor I," Gavin said, standing up. He rubbed his chin and thought a long moment. "Tomorrow night. Well, in that case, we had better be prepared to welcome them." "They said that Mr. Bryan's son was going to do it," Danny spoke up. "Mr. O'Brien?" Gavin asked. "That's him." Gavin chuckled. "I see. How lowly. Angus, tomorrow morning, before the end of dawn, I need you to take Mrs. Borders home and help her retrieve those minutes and bring them to my house. Neither the minutes nor Mrs. Borders will be there." "What about the burglars?" Angus asked. "Shall I take care of them?" "We'll both take care of it, but no need to worry now. Even if they got excited and decided to strike tonight, Mrs. Borders is at my house. Her life is more important than those minutes. I have the checks and balances, and I have my other ways. I will prove they are scoundrels." "I'll help," Danny cheered, pointing to herself proudly with her thumb. "I want you to keep your distance," Gavin told her. "I couldn't bear for anything to happen to you." "They can't scare me." "Please, Danny, don't get too courageous and stubborn." "Shall I take her back to the hospital?" Angus asked. "No!" Danny pleaded. "No, Mr. Gavin, I don't want to go back." "You can't stay out here, child. You'll freeze to death." "Can't I stay with you for a while? It's too scary to go back." "I thought you said you weren't scared," he smirked. "Please." He looked into her eyes, deep into them, and frowned. Oh, those eyes. His precious, precious Karasu. He sighed in defeat. "Very well. I'll let you come home with me for tonight, but tomorrow you go back." "How will you explain that to the staff?" Angus asked. "You would not be able to hide the fact that she ran away unless you took her back tomorrow evening and used your magic." Ooh, you're going to use vampire magic? Danny asked with excitement. Hold on now, you two. It appears if that is the best choice, then so be it. He brushed a hand through his hair. Boy, I've not had a child in my house for decades. He paused, looking around and smiling. It's snowing again. We'll be buried in the snow if it keeps up like it has been, Angus remarked. Danny let out a joyous cry and squatted down, clumping the snow between her mittens and throwing a snowball at Gavin. I can't remember the last time I played in the snow. She made another snowball and threw it at Angus. Let's play in the snow. In a cemetery? Gavin asked. They won't mind, Danny smiled. I'll be joining them soon. Both Angus and Gavin lowered their heads, but there was no time for sorrows as two more snowballs flew into their faces, knocking both of them backwards in surprise. She laughed hysterically. Gavin shot up and threw snow at her, not even wasting the time to clump it into a ball. Most of the powder dropped short of her as he chased after her. You'll have to do better than that, she called. She ran about, flopping onto her back and making a snow angel. He stopped just short of her, standing with his hands on his hips. Now what are you doing? Making a snow angel. Then an angel can look after all the people here. I'll be an angel one day, and I can look after everyone too. Gavin shook his head, offering his hand down to her. Let's make a snowman. That's fun too. Do you even know how? She asked. Oh, what a presumptuous child, he growled, crossing his arms. She skipped beside him, making him chase her here and there all over the cemetery. They were an amazing sight on this night. Angus could hear the music from the gramophone echoing out the mausoleum and out into the air as if it were amplifying the sounds for the souls. It accompanied the child and the vampire so nicely. He had to smile thoughtfully, seeing Gavin rushing about like a child, or like an excited puppy. He couldn't remember the last time he saw a smile that wide and that genuine on his face. He scooped up the child and spun her about as she held out her arms and cheered. He set her down, and the two of them danced about in the snow, seemingly in time with the happy music. When was the last time you danced, master? He whispered as he watched them, eventually seeing them spinning about with their arms outstretched, opening their mouths wide and sticking out their tongues with giggles in an attempt to catch snowflakes. My master,